You had been talking about the difference between sadness and sorrow. And so the first one was, I just wondered if you would elaborate on what you said. You had said that sadness is kind of the world, and of maybe of the body, of the emotions, but that sorrow is of the soul.
I think the first thing to say about these two emotions is that there are some temperaments that are wired just to be sad. And everything that they see that can be inspiring, that could be beautiful, it inspires the emotions of sadness and sorrow. Some temperaments are like that, And the best example I can give you is, I think, it's in Mental by Attar, and I think it's the life of, I'm not sure if it's Abu Sayyid Abu Khair or someone else, where there are two people, and I've shared the story with you in the past, but there are two characters, and these two characters have completely different temperaments, and they're just wired in this way. One temperament is quite happy and joyous, content in many ways. The other is sorrowful. So the person whose temperament is happy, is positive, he's in the business of being thankful. Thank you for my health, thank you for my wealth. The person who is sad and sorrowful is never thankful. They're always in a state of poverty. They're always longing, they're always praying for something to be satisfied within them, that they need help. Bob, our neighbor, he's 70-some. He is one of those happy temperaments. My father is one of those happy temperaments. So whenever they come, for example, he passes by and he sees the kids and he looks at me and says, "The kids keep you young." It may be some observation experience, being that he's 70 and he's raised a few kids, or it may be that for the most part that his temperament just demands such expressions. And given that I've been around him for the past 10 years, and most often his comments are quite positive, I'm just going to come to the conclusion that that's what his temperament is. Some people have the sorrowful temperament. Okay? And I don't know if I'm basically playing semantics, or there is actually a difference between sadness and sorrow. In my world, Cassie, because I like to kind of just go inside things and just open them up and see what lives inside them, for me, I think there is some differences in sadness and sorrow. I think sadness has to do in some ways that you expect something, that expectation doesn't come true, you become disappointed, and then you become sad. And it doesn't really have much longevity. And if you're not temperamentally sad or sorrowful, if you're not temperamentally passive, there's a good chance that your sadness, after like an hour or a few minutes, will go away because you've been able to healthily, hopefully, distract yourself from the thing that caused disappointment and sadness. You know. So I attribute sadness to, there is the physical, the emotional, the intellectual, forget the psychological. That you read, you hear that Irina Tweedy has another book you didn't know about, but all of a sudden it's being published. And you call Helen and you say, Helen, I hear that you've just published this book. She says, yeah, with the voice that she has, which is really nice. And you go to the bookstore, you go to her house, and you pick up the book. And you expect something like Daughter of Fire, that she has kind of expressed, she's poured her heart and her tears on the pages, and you open the pages and it's very disappointing. And then you become kind of sad, wasting energy, going all the way from Oakland to, Grass Valley. You are sad and disappointed by having wasted your money, wasted energy, that now you have this book and it's going to collect dust like all the other books. Deep down you're never going to read this book. So that's to some extent what sadness is, that you move in the physical world expecting things, demanding things, that you map things out, that you put in your MapQuest or GPS that, I want to go to Cafe Roma because they have the best tiramisu. And you go there and you buy a slice for like $9.99 and you eat it there, you bring it home and you say, man, this is disgusting. And, if you kind of were to play with the disgust or be intimate with the disgust for an hour or so, you realize the disgust and the anger eventually turns into hate, not hate so much, but sadness, because you know that your last option, your last place in Oakland to have, tiramisu was Cafe Roma. You had tried all the other places and they were quite awful. Tresta was the only place, and now you're quite sad because you can't find tiramisu in Oakland at all. Sorrow. Sorrow is this thing that has sadness in it, but it has components that sadness doesn't have. Sorrow is, and I think I should add also that you can't be sad about anything. You can't be mad about anything if there is or are no relationships. In other words, it is you having an imagination that I'm going to go to a Cafe Roma to get some tiramisu. And this imagination blossoms and it becomes more potent. And you picture yourself. It's 9 o'clock right now. You picture yourself at 9:25, 9:30 at Cafe Roma, standing in line, getting a tiramisu, sitting. So you have this picture in your head. A future Cassie is having a good amount of pleasure, fun. She's happy, enjoying tiramisu, and you go there and it's really, really quite bad. Now, if on the other hand, and because, from here to, say, downtown Oakland is a 20-minute drive, you're not going to have a good amount of sadness. You're not going to have a whole host of negative emotions like anger and disappointment, coming at you all at once. If, on the other hand, you're married, for example, and you've been married for, say, 15 years or 20 years, it's a 20-year relationship. There are lots of stories in those 20 years, lots of dreams, lots of hopes, lots of up and downs, where the both of you have sat and you figure things out to make things work. You have your kids involved, and maybe your spouse passes away. Maybe you guys just come to realize that it's just not working out, and it's impacting your child in a very, very awful way, and then you divorce. You can no longer be just sad about the divorce, because there is so much of you invested in that narrative called marriage. If someone asks you, who are you? You say, I'm a married woman. My name is Cassie Johannes, for example, if that's his last name. Okay? Where does your child go to school? Where my husband and myself drop our daughter and my son off to school, here and there. We both stand in the kitchen and cook. I mean, you're going through a whole host of things for 10 years period, you see. You only have an hour to yourself where you peel away the husband, you peel away the son, the daughter, okay? You peel away the kitchen, you stand naked in the back room, metaphorically speaking, you say, okay, I am Cassie with a PhD in religious studies. Now I'm going to sit and write, not as a mother, not as a wife, not as a cook, okay, not as a daughter. I'm going to write as an academician. I'm going to write as a mystic. Okay, but you only have that 1 hour. And because it's only 1 hour, you're not going to miss too much if you sit by the laptop and no writing comes out of you. You just say, it's just been an exhausting day. So when it's a 10-year marriage or a relationship where a good amount of your identity rests in it, when it falls apart, you have sorrow that contains sadness, that contains disgust, that contains reflection. It has a whole universe in it. Your soul is involved in it. Now, here's the thing you need to understand, for example, about, say, something like marriage, that if it dissolves, it turns into sorrow. You can have a fight with your husband and it can make you sad. But a divorce goes beyond you being sad. If you play with sadness too long, if you keep rewinding and replaying the narrative, it'll eventually get you really, really depressed. And that depression first is emotional. Then you try to resolve the emotional paralysis with, your power to think things through clearly. And there's a good chance you won't. So the depression impacts your thinking abilities. And then your emotions and the thinking impact your body. And then you find yourself in bed. You can't get out. You can't get up. You can't wash dishes. You can't cook. And you try, for the sake of your child, for the sake of your parents, for the sake of your husband, to get up and at least pretend to be active. But the moment your husband goes to work, the moment your child goes to school, you drop back in the bed and you want nothing to do except to sleep. And to some extent, I think your question of the difference between sadness and sorrow, it kind of relates to Alison's question of the different types of selves, the different worlds of nothingness. Because each world creates its own dependency, its own desires, its own pursuits, ambitions. And then what happens with the world of emotions, because emotions, They are there because of your physical engagement with things. Okay? But when a feeling turns into an emotion, it means that you must have done something. You must have been with someone. You must have done the same activity over and over and over again, where this negative feeling, this unpleasant feeling, turns into, say, anger. But now, because you're addicted physically to be in that space, or perhaps you just have no choice but to be in that space, anger persists. Okay? And then what happens in the world of the intellect, for example, now you become addicted to thinking things through, understanding. You know? And so when you spend like 10 hours of your time thinking, what can I do so that my daughter can read better, that my son can do math better, so that my husband can play piano better, and then you map everything out and you put your kid behind the piano and you realize, man, they're still awful. Because of time invested, energy invested, the things you expect, at least imagined expectations, you know, the disappointment just goes inside you. You know? So when you talk about someone like Jesus, for example, this is not a man who is sad. This is a man who has a good amount of sorrow inside him. His physical body is not made for drinking, for sex, for sloth. His emotional body is not made to just have a good time because it's just fun and pleasant. His intellectual body is not made to just engage in conversation. So this is a man who has no use of the appetites, the basic pleasures in life. You know, he doesn't care for cheap emotions. He doesn't care for cheap conversations. What's your gender, diversity, all that stuff. He doesn't care about any of that stuff. I mean, this is a man who's lost so much. There isn't much in the world that he could pursue. You know, this is beyond sadness. This is beyond grief. You know, so this is a man who just lives with and in sorrow. So the deeper your relationship, the more committed you are, the more invested you are, just in case things don't pan out. That's when sorrow hits you. You can overcome sadness. You know, it may take like a week, but a divorce, for example, or a death of someone you care for, and depending on, you know, how much you care, how intensely you care, how devoted you are to them, whether it's a husband or a wife or a parent, that sorrow is going to stay there for a couple of years. And then you don't have rituals for sadness, but you have rituals for sorrow. You know, it's very difficult to distract yourself when sorrow lives inside you. And in some ways, you could also say that sorrow comes with a great amount of understanding. You see too much. You know too much. You know. So remember, sadness does not contain sorrow, but sorrow contains sadness. It's something that Hafiz says, that چون که صد آید 90 هم پیش ماست. If you have $100 bill, in that $100 you have 90, you have 80, you have 70, 60, 50. But if you only have $10, you don't have 50, you don't have 60. You don't have sorrow and sadness. In sadness, you may have a good amount of anger. In sorrow, you don't have anger. Sorrow is very passive. in sorrow you have grief, you have solitude. You have that in sadness as well, but it expresses itself, I think, differently. If you've had a boyfriend for 2 weeks and things don't work out, you just move on. But if you've had a boyfriend for like 10 years, it's really, really difficult to move on. You're just kind of stuck for like 5 years. It's because of, how much of you lived in the relationship, how much of you identified and related. Now, the other thing about sadness and sorrow, I think, is sorrow to some extent this will make it a little difficult, and in fact it'll counter everything I just said. I think ultimately sorrow can only live inside those who know how to use sorrow well. Sorrow can exist in Khalil Gibran because it inspires him to write. Without sorrow, he can't write. In sorrow, you have Mozart. He was a happy chap, but there was a good amount of sorrow in him, and that sorrow created this longing. And so his music is, to some extent, otherworldly, really. I mean, sure, some of it is courtly and all, but for the most part, it's really quite beautiful, So if you have sorrow, and if you are refined and seasoned, you take advantage of sorrow, because it does. The thing with sorrow is that it really makes you immensely lonely. It's what we say in the Sufi tradition, khalvat dar anjuman. Khalvat means solitude, and anjuman means like a gathering like the one that we have right now. How could someone be alone when they sit in a community of people? It's not that they're depressed. I mean, that could be a shade of it, sure. They understand that this too shall pass. They understand the futility of language. They understand the futility of emotions, the passing, the coming and the going. They understand the cunningness of the intellect and the language, the words that it creates and strings together. They understand the short life of inspiration and motivation. They also understand that this is a journey that they need to go on their own. No one can accompany them. That's what khalvat is. They don't get lost in the language. They don't get lost in the conversation. They may be inspired, but they don't get lost in it. In the background, they always know they're alone. And in that aloneness, there's a good amount of sorrow. A very mature and quiet yearning and longing. There's a good amount of understanding. And, if you come from a relatively mature background, that sorrow will lead to prayer. It'll lead to writing, to thinking, to going for a walk, what we call, contemplation, whether walking or sleeping or whatever. When my mom lost her mother, she was sad and sorrowful. And she may still be sad and sorrowful, and I'm sure she is when she thinks of her mom. But that sorrow did not transform her. She didn't sit and say, everybody dies. It's not like a thing someone like Gilgamesh goes through, where you love someone and you lose that person. And, even when you read, for example, the Gospel of, Mark, when Jesus says to them that he's going to die, and the disciples are sitting around saying, okay, so when Jesus dies, who's going to take over? Sure, they're going to be sad, maybe even sorrowful a little bit, but the truth is, none of them are ever going to be Christed. None of them are ever going to be anointed by God, because they're far too pathetic, far too shallow and superficial. They don't really know what to do with grief, with the passing of Jesus. All they know is that they'll be sad, they'll be sorrowful, and then they have to figure out who's going to sit on the top. That's how it is. The sorrow that Gilgamesh had, for example, and many others who've kind of walked the path of Gilgamesh is, you love, you invest yourself in the relationship, and you are what you love. You are Enkidu. You no longer are Gilgamesh. You're no longer a king. You're a slave to the person that you love, who is Enkidu. And he dies. And the nice thing about this particular sorrow is that he only grieves for Enkidu for maybe a day, maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days. That sorrow eventually leads him to the door of death. That if eventually I'm going to end up like this chap here, Enkidu, it matters very little whether you're a king or a slave. And that's a sorrow that will transform you, push you on a quest. And after Enkidu, every step that he walks is a step in sorrow. And then when, nobody just writes on the wall. Are you kidding? Why would you want to write your story on the wall when you can talk into the ears of people? But the sorrow is great. The journey is complicated. No one grieves the right way. No one is transformed by grief the right way. No one understands love and loss the right way. It's only Gilgamesh who understands all of this stuff. And there's a tremendous amount of loneliness and sorrow in that. And the only thing he does, he writes on the wall. And the only thing I or you as a professor do is we quiz our students about if Gilgamesh wrote on 5 tablets or 25 tablets. It's called education. That's it. What was the other question you had?
Can I ask a different?
Sure.
So, you know how you talk about the emotions having a lot of history in them, that, if I'm understanding right, that you say emotions are historical. Does sorrow have history in it? And does it also have no history in it?
Well, I don't know if you heard about maybe 20 minutes ago gunshots. And I don't know if you just read on the news that they had to do with 4 people being shot right now. Are you sad about their death? Of course not. Are you sorrowful? Of course not. Do their death cause you to reflect on your life? No. And the reason is, first, you don't know who these people are. Second, you don't really care for them because you don't know them. And their presence or absence makes little difference to you. Unless you're just a hippie, where you want to like pretend as if you are a lover of all life forms. You know, that even when you walk on grass, you have no choice but to shed tears uncontrollably because the blade of grass feels so much pain as you walk on it. You know, I mean, if you're that kind of a person, you really just need to be on some sort of a medication. And so, and don't get me wrong, there are moments where you need to feel that way about the grass. But there are these very, very special and unique and rare moments that kind of impose themselves upon you, where the grass becomes an extension of you, and you have this assumption that, you know, the grass feels and you don't want to harm it. But for the most part, you know, we're quite callous, and it should be that way. It's good for us. Otherwise, you know, the weight of it will just crush you. You know, there are, again, the temperaments who are wired to be passive, the temperaments who are wired to be introverts, the temperaments who are wired to be sorrowful. They can have the emotion of sorrow, but it's connected to nothing. You know, در اندرون من خسته دل ندانم چیست که من خموشم و او در فغان و در غوغاست. I don't really know what lives inside me or who lives inside me. I'm so quiet, I'm just sitting, just having a good time, relaxing, watching TV. But it just comes out screaming, feed me, feed me. And I say, well, do you want a burger? No. من سر نخورم که سر گران است، پاچه نخورم که استخوان است، من نور خورم که قوت جان است. It's in the Divan Shams that, you know, I don't want a hamburger, and I don't want hot dogs, and I don't want pizza. Give me light. You know, give me illumination, give me God. That's what I need. And so you have some temperaments whose longings are mysterious. You know, it's not connected to any interaction that, for example, you have with the things down here. You're not sorrowful because of your husband or because of your mother or because of your daughter. You're just a weirdo. You know, there is something about you that just is discontent. You know, it's when I was in Roseville some weeks ago, many weeks ago, I bought these succulent plants because they don't need very much water, and it's good to have them, especially now. And so they behave so strangely that night comes, like around 5 in the afternoon or 6, they climb up, they close up. And then like around 6 or 7 in the morning, well, about 9, where the sun is out and the weather is a little warm, all of a sudden they blossom, they open up, and you have all these beautiful flowers, you know. It's as if something about them just longs to open and something about them just longs to close. It makes no sense because, you know, I'm not a botanist. I don't know how these things work. But I think some people are like that. I mean, they're just walking around and all of a sudden sorrow overcomes them. Where, how, what, no one knows. So yeah, you can have certain emotions that have no connection. The emotion of sorrow. I don't know. I mean, if you're a Freudian and you believe in the collective unconscious, where when you're usually a very calm, you know, human-loving person, and one day you just take a hammer and just whack your neighbor with it, and when they ask you, I really don't know what happened. You know, that this anger has always lived inside you. It's not really connected to anything. Once in a while it just shows itself. Why? How? Who the hell knows? But I think most often our emotions are always connected to something that we've had a relationship with. I'll give you an example. It's a bad example, but I'll give it to you nevertheless. I received an email from a certain committee on campus that they have to vote on a class to see if they're going to continue having it active or just deactivate it. And they said, well, you need to be there. I used to have a good amount of respect for this particular committee because I would create courses, go before them. Then after some back and forth, I realized that I go in and there are 10 people and I have to fight with 9 of them. And they request things from me that they don't request from any other faculty on campus. I took the matter to the vice president and the president, and they met with the committee, I think. So the following week, when the class was, one of my classes were put to vote, first they said yes, we accept, and then one of them stood up and says, I don't know why we have to say yes. But it was approved. So when they sent me this email, because of the history I've had, maybe committee members have changed, I don't really know. You know, you become angry and then you move into this other very strange emotion called indifference. It's very passive. And it's not because you're indifferent. I mean, it's not because you've always been indifferent. You know, you expected, you got disappointed, pressure was added, you became really angry and aggressive. It took a toll on you. Then there was this breaking point where you said, I don't need to create any more classes. About 6, you'll retire in a couple of years. Who cares? And then time passed, and I say to myself, I'm a full-time faculty. They can't deactivate these courses. It's impossible. Okay, so they'll remove me from being the chair of the department. What are they going to do? Not pay me? That's against the law. I can sue them. Do you see? So this place of being indifferent has a long history. So again, most of the emotions that we have, it is grounded to this place down here. All the interactions we've had. And you have to have had some emotional investment. We spoke about John Adams School in Roseville, and let's say you go home and you find their number and you call them and they say, yeah, come over, we'll sign up your daughter. And your life is busy, it's quite tiring just to be alive, add to it to be a mother and a wife and a this and a that. And so you drive all the way there and you go to the office and say, oh, I'm sorry, we have no openings here. Are you kidding? I just called 10 minutes ago. And then, as you drive back, you say, well, I'm just not going to do this again. These people are just not very organized. And you say that because of you expected to go there and sign up your daughter. But it just didn't happen. What this means then is the following. If you know how you are wired, passive or active, happy or sorrowful, if you also know what kinds of emotions you desire to have, you enjoy having inside you, if being too happy does not lend itself to writing, inspired writing, then you have to make a decision. Most of the people you invite to the house are people who just laugh and have a good time. And then when they leave, you look at your house and you say, damn, this is awful. And then you go sit and write, you're mentally exhausted. So you say, okay, it's very much like cooking, and you ask your husband, what do you want to eat? And he says, well, I want to eat like pizza today. Okay, so you kind of look yourself in the mirror and you say, so Cassie, what kind of emotions do you want to have tonight? Okay, you say, well, it wouldn't be bad for me to write. Well, writing needs preparation. What do you need? Well, I write when I'm happy. Well, that's not the case. You write when you're sad. So what people do you invite? Well, you invite Allison, and then you invite Stacy. Now, you call Allison. Allison is like weeping on the phone. You say, Allison, I just called to say what's going on. Oh my God, what the hell is going on? Oh, nothing, my life is A, B, C, D. You say, okay, come over. And then you call Stacy, and Stacy, how are you? And she's whistling and she's laughing, she's having a good time. You say, okay, I don't think I want to have Stacy over the house. She's too happy for me. She's going to destroy this mood that I'm looking for. So you invite Allison because she can cook the emotion of sorrow or longing or yearning for something, whereas Stacy just destroys it. And just look at this as like dating or a relationship. What do you want to have? Who do you want to go out with? A happy emotion or a sad emotion? And then you go to the cupboard and look for the right components and then bring them together, and then you'll be sad and then you write. Or you'll be happy and you won't write, and then you'll be regretful.